One day in February, a boy and girl went to have lunch. Then they looked at some cars on a sales lot and ended the day ring shopping. Little did the girl know, once the two parted ways that day, she would never see him again, as she didn't want her final memory of him to be his lifeless body in his coffin. We're heading back to Northern California. Not Sacramento, but the actual Northern California, which is all the way up almost to the Oregon border on the coastal side. Off of Highway 101 is Crescentcity, California in Delnorte County, and this is home to some of the most beautiful scenery you will ever come across. The town is known for being where the forest meets the sea as it runs along the ocean shores. And if you were to look from a satellite view, the beach on the south side of town is in the shape of a crescent, and this is how it got the name Crescent City. The forest is on the other side of town, and it's not just any forest, but it is a redwood forest. Now, if you've never seen a redwood tree, they're huge trees that are hundreds of years old. They go up to 300 feet tall with a base of about 25 foot wide, so they're just enormous. They're beautiful and kind of magical. Some redwoods have the bases cut out, so they're big enough for cars to drive through. If you look up online, drive through tree, you can see and get a better idea of the size, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So in this beautiful, majestic place, you can walk on the beach, go dip your toes in the ocean, build a bonfire, and hang out or even sleep on the beach under the stars. Then head just a few miles over, it's literally only 3 miles away, and go walk in the redwoods and sleep under the stars there, under the tree canopies. Then go swimming in the gorgeous Smith River, which is known to be the cleanest river in the United States, and you can fish, raft, kayak, or just lay out next to it and catch some sun rays. After hearing all of this, I'm sure you're planning your next vacation, which you probably wouldn't regret doing at all. It's absolutely beautiful and should be added to your bucket list for sure. Many people and families come from all over to see these wonders every year from about May to October 1st. It's home to travelers in RVs, tents, cabins, and cars who come to experience just the sheer beauty of this place. But underneath all of these beautiful elements, some truly ugly things have occurred. This town is advertised in a way that you only see the beauty in it, and that it's a small, close-knit community, which automatically makes people think of that perfect type of place where everyone knows your name and you all look out for each other. And the residents of Crescent City see it in a much different light. A small, close-knit community is code for it's a small town with only 10,000 people, a fifth of the population is in a maximum security prison, and everyone knows your name and all of your business. And what they don't know for sure, they will make up about you because there are a lot of bored people trying to make life exciting. On top of all the small town drama, it's a coastal town, so even when it should be warm and sunny, it's very cloud covered, cold, gloomy, and just downright depressing. It's overcast, foggy, cold, and windy about 10 months out of the year, and it rains a lot. And we're not talking about some sprinkles and stay inside. We're talking sideways, downpour, rain for days and weeks at a time. And the wind's not just wind, it's hurricane force winds without the hurricane. And I'm not even joking. Power outages can last for days to weeks sometimes. Occasionally it's only for a few hours, but that's rare. And then if that's not terrible and depressing enough, there's nothing to do aside from visiting the ocean and the forest. The poverty level is far beyond the national average, leaving about a quarter of the already small population in poverty. Many of these factors make it extremely hard for the young people in this town to make it onto a path of success. The combination of small town and no activities leaves them more likely to do what bored kids do and go out looking for excitement. Some of the youths do productive things and normal kid activities like go fishing, hunting, get jobs, play sports. But what some of the kids start doing to cure their boredom turns into lifelong habits, criminal records, and teen pregnancies. Now, all of this perpetuates the cycle, keeping the small town in poverty and crime levels at an all-time high. The police presence is also huge in this very small town, which leads to a lot of bored cops who like to nitpick on the kids, and this creates criminal records for them that can sometimes follow them around for life, just depending on how old the kid is. And then they also let a lot of big things slide through the cracks. So they're there nitpicking on kids for the things that they do, and then they're letting some fairly large things just go unnoticed. So some of the fairly large things that have happened with the police force there is cops have been known to use their badge to confiscate their next fix. There have been judges who are caught red-handed with drugs but allowed to continue putting people in jail for the same thing. And sheriffs who had to forcibly retire early so they could save face because their misconduct was starting to surface. There are so many stories from people that shed light on the incompetence and corruption, but are they just stories from criminals who all think they've been wronged, or is there something more to it? Some of these are newer occurrences that can be looked up online, and what you'll find is comment after comment of personal experiences, but you can draw your own conclusions. If what they say is true, it kind of makes sense why some investigations tend to go nowhere, or just don't happen at all. I am sure you're thinking, wait, you've told us stories of solved murders though, and I have, but how were they solved? A random CODIS hit after 9 years that happened to stop a predator, abuser, and murderer's reign of terror? The other case was a confession almost 3 decades later, and the killer only confessed to save his own life. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's a small town, and the stories I've told you are from the 80s. They didn't have the resources they do today, and many of the cases from that era have the same outcomes. Cold cases not being solved for years or decades, and some not at all. And this is all true, but there were many contributing factors to the lack of crime solving and the growing number of cold cases. Most of the things that factor in are lack of manpower, resources, and knowledge. So we didn't know back then what we know now, but today there are no excuses, and the cases are still going cold. So the reason crimes are still not being solved is definitely not because we're dealing with super intelligent, very careful criminals, or even reasons pertaining to the resources and lack of knowledge. Maybe knowledge is a factor because if they can't see the forest through the trees in some of these cases, there's definitely a lack of that. See what I did there? Many of these cases I have knowledge of because they're close friends or family members of my close friends, and I'm not biased or trying to solve things in any way. Refer to the disclaimer, please. But when you know of certain things that happened and there's zero information about it to the extent that your memory is the only evidence that this thing even occurred, I would say that's a problem. In some cases, it seems very odd that nothing's being done and a version of events is just accepted. I would think anyone with a brain would be like, yeah, something else is going on here and we need to look into that. But that's not happening. In 2002, a young girl in a red Camaro is living life. Maybe not in the best way, but during this time frame it seems to be common for many young people, especially from this small town, to live life not in the best way. She had many friends from all walks of life, one being 22-year-old Alan Nuss. There was a bit of an age difference between them, but she was an old soul and resonated with a slightly older crowd. Many of you are thinking, yeah, right, she was just underage and they had to keep their relationship under wraps. But no, definitely not, because the girl was me, and Alan was one of my best friends, more like a brother. We knew each other from school. He was taking classes for his GED where I went to high school, and it was this high school that was usually for kids that got expelled and kind of didn't fit in anywhere else. They did have a daycare for pregnant and teen moms, so they could still have daycare provided and finish high school. It was also a place where if you proved that traditional high school or public school was an unhealthy environment and you were falling behind, you could also attend there. Alan obviously was out of high school, but he was taking classes there for his GED. So that's where we started hanging out, and then we also hung out outside of school as well. Alan was really protective, so he was kind of everything that a big brother should be, and he was taken away from everyone who loved and cared about him way too soon. On February 8th, it was a Friday and a random sunny, beautiful day in the middle of winter. I can't remember exactly how we met up. I just know I was at work. I don't completely remember if I was getting off work or if I had just dropped in to pick up my paycheck. But Alan was walking down the road and saw me, and we started talking. He asked for a ride and if I could help him with something important. So we went and ate lunch. And then there was a car sale going on in the parking lot of Kmart, so we stopped and looked at cars. And of course, the car salesman was hot on our tail, and they wanted to appraise my car. We didn't think it would hurt to find out how much it was worth. And the salesman came back and gave a super low price, of course, and informed us that he had to dock $500 because, quote unquote, it was dirty. So we just kind of laughed, and Alan told him for $500 we can go vacuum it out. So then we left and headed to Kmart and tried on ring after ring. Now I know you're thinking, wait a minute, what happened to he's like a brother and now you're trying on rings? Well, he is like a brother, but he had asked me to try on rings and give my opinion, basically be a ring model and give a girl's opinion on the rings, because he was going to propose to his girlfriend on Valentine's Day in a few days. So we looked and looked and looked, and then he had to go, and so did I, so we went our separate ways, and little did I know that I would never see him again. So the next day, later on in the day, I can't remember exactly what time, but it was dark out. I got a call from my boyfriend at the time. He was at a house party in an apartment complex that everyone called the Projects. So he wanted me to come pick him up, and I headed over there to get him. And there were people inside the house, outside, and I asked someone to go let my boyfriend know that I was there. And they headed inside, and a few minutes later, he was making his way out to the car. On his way out, he actually saw Alan. Alan had some boxing gloves on, and he was showing them to him, and then my boyfriend said, "Hey, I'll box with you." And then they both laughed, and Alan said, "Okay," and then my boyfriend walked out to the car, and we drove away. We were driving out to my boyfriend's house, and I don't even think we'd made it there yet. His cell phone rang. Yes, he was super cool, and back then he had a cell phone. And it was his aunt who was still at the house party that I had just picked him up from, and she was screaming. I could hear her across the car over the music, and she was screaming, oh my God, they stabbed him. Please come get me out of here, hurry." So we turned around and headed straight back there. He was still on the phone with her. He stayed on the phone with her pretty much the whole time we were driving back. And we got back there pretty quickly. So once we got there, she hopped in the car, and the police hadn't even arrived yet. And the police station's like 4 blocks away, and he lived on the outskirts of town. So keep in mind I was 16 and didn't know anything about law, or that you would need to stay around and talk to cops, or that anyone shouldn't leave a murder scene. I wasn't really in tune with all of that back then. So We went and picked her up and she got in the car. And I don't think that she was involved in any way. She was just scared. So it's definitely not something that anyone would be comfortable with witnessing. And, she definitely wasn't responsible in any way at all. As we were driving, we were asking her what happened. And all she could really say was they stabbed him and that him was Alan, and she believed that he was dead. She never said who was responsible, and it didn't seem like she actually saw it happen. She just heard the commotion and saw the aftermath, which was Alan's motionless body on the floor of the kitchen and a pool of blood. She had also mentioned when she left, people were saying, he fell on the knife, he fell on the knife. And she kind of scoffed and laughed and insinuated that that was idiotic. And looking back, I kind of feel like that was their way of getting their story straight before the police came. So that's a pretty, unanimous thing to say, and then it's nobody's fault, right? And if you say it out loud, then you start to believe it. So you have this thing that everybody believes, it's nobody's fault, he just fell, just a party, drunk people all around, so accidents happen, right? But anyone with half a mind would have the same reaction that my boyfriend's aunt did. Yeah, right. So we went to his funeral, and that was really the last I ever heard of it. No one we knew was ever questioned. No arrests were ever made. No investigation happened. And it's a small town and people talk. Everyone knows everyone's business. So if there was an investigation, there would have been some buzz about it. And there was just nothing. It was like they just kind of accepted the he fell story. But why? I mean, why would anybody think that seemed legitimate? And the police had dozens of suspects with it being a party. I'm sure there was drinking and drugs and criminal records. There was definitely a weak link in that crowd that could have been broken. Much later on, someone had mentioned that they heard it was a case of mistaken identity. The person responsible thought Alan was someone else and stabbed him. No one ever revealed the name. And when I started this story, I attempted to do research online, and there's just no story about it at all. There's no news article even about, tragic accident at a house party, someone dies by falling on a knife. Like, there's just nothing there saying it's accident, murder, yay, nay, or boo. Like, just zero. Honestly, it was really hard to find anything. The only thing that I was able to find was some information about his family, who his close family has mostly passed away, and his headstone for his grave. And that's about it. So, again, small town, and if a murder investigation was happening, it would have been known. People can't help but talk there. It's just hardwired in them to run their mouths. So, even if people were questioned, even if they had nowhere to go with it, it's like an investigation didn't happen at all. Like, you would know if somebody was questioned. Nobody was talking about anything, and it's just kind of like the police accepted this. Oh yeah, like, he fell on a knife, that makes sense, case closed, we're done here, and nothing went any further. I just really hope whoever cut Alan's life short will eventually be put to justice, because there's no statute of limitations on murder. So, unless you've already passed on or you're in prison for something else, this is always hanging over your head, and I hope that justice is served, because he was a very young, amazing person that didn't deserve to die. Now, given my background, I obviously know open investigations aren't broadcast all over, but there's usually some kind of initial news story, and there's just nothing. Not even about it being an accident. And after 20 years, you would think they could do some kind of news story, ask for information or details from the people that had been there. And there's just nothing. And if you didn't know it happened, you would never be able to find any information that it did. So that's going to do it for today's story. I hope you enjoyed hearing it, but I really don't enjoy telling this one because it is a little personal for me. Alan was a great friend of mine, and I do hope that maybe this sheds a little bit of light. Maybe, I don't know, someone eventually comes forward or his killer gets caught. I don't believe for a second that he fell on a knife and that's how he died. So I hope that some good comes of this, maybe some sparks something in someone's mind. And I also apologize, I'm not sick or anything, but I feel like I'm having allergies, so I can't breathe very well. So if you hear me wheezing and sounding like my nose is stuffy, it's true, it is. I hope you guys enjoy the story again. Please have a great weekend.